Montana Territory, late January 1883, the Jefferson River ran black and bitter cold through the snow-covered valley, iced at the edges, swift at the center. Rhett Vance heard the scream first short, sharp, then swallowed by the wind. He kicked his horse hard, boots slamming into the gelding's sides as he charged down the ridge. Snow slapped his face, the world a blur of white and pine and urgency. The river came into view just as he reached the edge of the ravine. His eyes locked on a figure half submerged in the icy water, clinging to a jagged rock. Long dark skirts tangled around her legs, arms trembling against the current. He threw himself off his horse, sliding down the embankment, boots scrambling for ground. "Hold on," he yelled, voice hoarse in the wind, the woman's eyes barely lifted to meet his. "Why bother?" she said, voice barely above the water. Rhett's jaw tightened as he stepped into the freezing water without hesitation, gripping her arm. "Because you matter," he said, pulling her free. She was near frozen, lips blue, arms limp. He wrapped her in his coat, sweeping her into his arms and stumbling back toward his horse. By the time they reached his cabin, a mile west through snow-crushed pines, her breathing was thin and ragged. Rhett kicked the door open, rushed to the hearth, and laid her down close to the fire. He stripped off his coat, then her wet outer layers, wrapping her in every blanket he owned. Her skin was cold as stone. He rubbed her arms and legs again and again, whispering, "Stay with me." "Come on now." After a long while, she stirred, her voice cracked. "I should have let it take me." "Not on my watch," he said, crouching close. "You do not get to disappear today." She turned her face away, but not before he saw the tears. Rhett didn't ask questions. He just sat there, fed the fire, and stayed close. She slept through the night and most of the next day. When she woke, the sun was high and the warmth of the fire had chased the worst of the cold from her bones. He handed her a tin cup of broth. "Name?" she hesitated. "Be what?" "Zeller," he nodded. "Rhett Vance." She looked around, taking in the one-room cabin, the rough-hewn walls, the saddle propped by the door. "You live alone." "My brother died in the war, folks gone, just me now." He studied her face. "What about you?" Her mouth flattened. "No one left." He waited. Her voice cracked again. "My husband died 2 years ago, consumption. 2 children, I left them in town 2 days ago." "Left them," she nodded slowly. "I could not feed them anymore. Gave them to a church orphanage in Virginia City. I thought, maybe they'd get a better chance." Rhett's face didn't change, he just nodded once. "What are their names?" "Daisy, she is 6, and Drew, he is 4. Her chin trembled. "They cried when I walked away." Rhett stood and walked to the door, staring out at the snow. "That is a heavy kind of pain, Bea. I could not carry it any longer." He turned around, his voice low. "Then let me help you carry it." For a long moment she did not speak, then her eyes met his. Something quiet passed between them, not yet trust, but something close. She stayed in the cabin. One day turned into 2. Rhett gave her his bed and took the floor. He did not press her with questions, did not ask why she had walked into that river. Each morning he made coffee and let her sit in silence. By the end of the week, she was helping him cut wood. Her hands blistered fast, but she did not complain. "You do not have to stay out here," Rhett said one afternoon as they stood by the chopping stump. "I know. You could go back to town, start fresh." Bea looked out across the valley. "It is easier to breathe here." That night she cooked for the first time, salt pork and potatoes. Rhett said it was the best thing he had tasted since 1879, and she smiled for the first time. "You really came into that river for a stranger," she said, watching him from across the fire. "You were not a stranger once I saw your eyes." Her breath caught. "You do not even know me." "I know enough." She looked down, hands folding in her lap. "Do you think I am a bad mother?" "No," Rhett said without hesitation. "I think you were drowning and no one saw it." She blinked. "You saw it." "I did." That night she did not cry. The next morning, Rhett found her outside before sunrise, looking out at the ridgeline, frost in her hair. "I want to see them again," she whispered. "My children." Rhett stepped beside her. "Then we will go." She turned. "You would come with me. I pulled you out of that river. I am not letting you go back in." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She did not wipe them away. He took her hand. "You matter, Bea. That will not change." She gripped his fingers tightly. And for the first time in a long time, she believed it. The road out of the valley was little more than a narrow trail packed by deer and wind. The sky had been clear for 3 days, the snow hardening underfoot, making it easier to travel but brittle and loud with every step. Rhett hitched the sled to the back of his horse, loaded it with enough dried meat and grain to last through the journey, and tied down a small trunk for Beah. She hadn't said what was inside, only that it was all she had left from before. Beah sat behind him on the saddle, wrapped in his spare coat, silent as they climbed the ridge. Her hands were steady against his waist, but her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "You been to Virginia City before?" Rhett asked as they reached the tree line. "I was born there," she said. "My father traded pelts along the Ruby, had a cabin near Alder Gulch before the gold dried up." "That makes you one of the old ones," Rhett said. "Most folks there now just came to chase silver. They came to forget something," she replied. "Same as me." They camped that night beneath a windbreak of spruce, a small fire tucked low to keep from catching too much attention. Rhett offered her the last of the blackberry jam he'd traded for in Whitehall. She took it without comment, then surprised him by humming a few bars of a lullaby as she chewed. He leaned back on his bedroll. "That a song your mama sang?" "No," she said. Daisy used to hum it when she brushed Drew's hair, made him sit still. Rhett watched the firelight flicker across her face. "You think they're in good hands?" Beah folded the cloth around the empty tin. "I don't know. But I never wanted them to think I stopped loving them." "They won't," he said. She didn't answer, but she didn't turn away either. The next morning, they rode past the broken fence line of an abandoned ranch. Its barn collapsed under the weight of snow. Beah pointed toward a patch of flattened brush near the creek. "That's where my husband buried his first saddle. Said he'd earned it with his own hands and didn't want another man sitting it after he was gone." "What was his name?" "Elias," she said. "He had a voice like thunder and hands soft enough to wash a newborn." Rhett didn't speak for a while, then quietly, "He was lucky. He had you." Beah lowered her eyes. "Not at the end. He didn't." They reached Virginia City on a gray morning, the sky swollen with low cloud and the air thick with coal smoke. The town sprawled unevenly along the hillside, half mud streets lined with plank walks and false front buildings. A boy rang a bell outside the assay office, calling out silver prices, while a woman sold hot biscuits from a cart near the livery. Beah dismounted without waiting for help, her boots crunching through half-frozen slush. Rhett tied the horse and followed her. She walked with purpose, past the general store, the schoolhouse, until they reached a squat stone building with a painted wooden sign that read St. Agnes Home for Children. She stopped at the steps. "I can't walk in there with nothing." "You've got their names and your heart still beating," Rhett said. "That's not nothing." Beah stood still for a long moment, then she climbed the steps and opened the door. He waited outside, pacing slow circles in the street, glancing at the hitch rail, the cold sky, the crooked steeple of the chapel across the way. He didn't look up until the door creaked open again. Beah stepped out, holding a small blue ribbon in her hand. Her mouth trembled, but her eyes were steady. "They're here," she said. "They remember me." He took her hand. "What did they say?" "They asked if I was staying." Rhett studied her face. "And are you?" Beah looked down at the ribbon, then back toward the home. "Not without them." "There's room at the cabin," he said. "We'll make more if we need to." She touched his coat sleeve, fingers light. "You do that?" "I already did," Rhett said. "The moment I pulled you from that river," Beah laughed, soft and broken, but real. "You're not what I expected." "I'm not much of anything," he said. "Just a man who couldn't leave you behind." She looked toward the schoolyard. "Then let's not leave them behind either." Rhett nodded once. "All right." And when Daisy and Drew came out, blinking against the cold, their hands in each other's, Beah knelt down and opened her arms. They didn't hesitate. They ran straight into her. Rhett stepped back and let them have that moment, watching her hold them like something sacred. Later, when the sun was low and they were packed up to ride again, Beah turned to him. "I don't feel empty anymore." He took her hand, rough with cold, warm with life. "That's all I ever wanted for you." She squeezed his fingers. "Then come with us, stay with us." He didn't answer with words. He just gathered the reins, helped the children into the sled, and climbed into the saddle beside her. And they rode north, toward the place where the fire never went out and nothing was forgotten, only carried with love. The cabin sat quiet beneath a new blanket of snow. its roofline soft edged against the dark pines behind it. Rhett stepped down first, lifting Drew from the sled and setting him in the snow with a gentle pat to his back. Beah followed with Daisy bundled in her arms, the girl half asleep from the ride, curls tangled beneath her wool cap. The door groaned open the same way it always had, but everything inside felt different. There were voices now, small feet scuffling across the floor, laughter that bounced off the walls like sunlight through glass. Rhett had cleared space on the shelf for the children's few belongings: 2 books, a cloth doll, a tin whistle, and built a narrow bunk beside the hearth for them to share. He'd shaved the wood smooth himself after supper the night before, hands steady as he worked by lamplight, pausing only when Beah dozed off with her head resting near his knee. That morning, Beah rolled up her sleeves and began scrubbing the cabin's windows with melted snow and vinegar, her breath puffing white against the glass. Rhett watched her from the doorway, arms crossed, until she turned and nodded toward the smokehouse. "You got any lard stored out there?" he pointed with his chin. "Top shelf, wrapped in burlap. I could make biscuits if the flour hasn't gone musty." He stepped aside to let her pass. "It's good." "I checked it last week." Daisy trailed after her mother, dragging one of Rhett's old gloves behind her like a toy. She didn't speak much yet, not to him, but she watched everything with wide, tea-colored eyes. By midday, the cabin smelled of salt and baking bread. Rhett sat on the porch with Drew, showing him how to whittle a whistle from a willow branch. The boy's hands were small but careful. "Did you make things with your brother?" Drew asked, tongue poking out as he cut a shallow line. Rhett looked over the trees, remembering. "Sometimes." He liked drawing better, though, always had charcoal on his fingers. "Did he die?" "Yeah." Drew didn't ask how. He just nodded like he understood that some things didn't need explaining. Later, as the sun dipped low and the wind picked up sharp from the west, they gathered around the table. The meal was simple hot biscuits, boiled beans, dried apple slices warmed in butter, but no one spoke until plates were half empty. "There's an old root cellar behind the shed," Beah said, cutting her biscuit in half. "It's deep and dry. We could keep more stores if we set it right." Rhett leaned back. "You thinking about staying through spring?" "I already stayed," she said. "Now I'm thinking about planting." He didn't smile, but something eased in his shoulders. "I've got a sack of seed potatoes in the loft. Wasn't sure I'd bother with them this year." "Well," she said, folding a napkin across her lap, "seems like we've got mouths to feed now." That night, after the children had curled into their blankets, Rhett stood outside under a moon that lit the snow in soft blue. Beah came to stand beside him, her shawl wrapped tight. He didn't look at her when he spoke. "You've changed something here." She tilted her head. "How do you mean?" "This place used to feel like waiting," he said. "Now it feels like it's going somewhere." Beah was quiet for a long while. Then she said, "I used to think if I kept still long enough, the ache would stop. And now, I think I was wrong." He turned to her. Her eyes were clear in the moonlight, not dulled like that first day, not lost. "I don't want to disappear anymore," she said. He stepped closer. "You won't." "Not while I'm breathing." Her fingers found his, warm despite the cold. "I'm scared of wanting something again." He didn't pull away. "I'm not." They stood like that, hands clasped, the snow falling soft around them. Inside, the fire crackled low. Daisy stirred in her sleep, and Drew sighed contentedly in his dreams. Beah looked at Rhett, and this time she didn't turn away. "You didn't just pull me out of the river." "I know," he said. "You pulled me out of something too." She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. No promises, no declarations. Just steady breath and the quiet understanding of two people who had found something solid in each other after too many years alone. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. Rhett reached up, brushing a damp curl from her cheek. "We'll build this slow," he said. "And true," she whispered. He nodded. "Always." And inside, the cabin waited, not empty, not silent, but full of the kind of warmth that didn't come from fire alone. By early March, the river had begun to show its edges again, thin ribbons of dark water curling between crusts of thawing ice. The snow no longer fell in silence, but came in heavy, wet clumps that melted before nightfall. The valley smelled of damp earth and old bark, and the air carried the sharp bite of coming rain. Beah stood at the edge of the garden plot Rhett had cleared beyond the pines. She held the hoe like she'd once held a ledger, precise, decisive. Daisy crouched beside her, poking holes in the softened dirt with a stick while Drew dragged a basket behind them, collecting pebbles. "You ever plant anything before?" Rhett asked, stepping around the shed with a coil of rope slung over his shoulder. "Turnips," Beah said, squinting toward the tree line. "In a window box that never got enough sun, they grew sideways." He dropped the rope beside the fence rail. "These'll do better. Ground's richer here." She gave a short laugh, the sound low in her throat. "Seems like everything's richer here." Rhett crouched near the edge of the plot and ran his hand through the soil. "I was thinking," he said, "about building a smoke pit deeper in the trees. Keep the scent off the house when we're curing meat." Beah wiped her brow with the back of her wrist. "That'd mean more hides to trade. We're due a good hunt. I saw elk sign east of the ridge." She nodded once, then glanced toward the cabin. "I could teach Daisy to mend rawhide if you bring some back." At supper, the table held a plate of boiled parsnips and 2 small trout Rhett had pulled from a half-frozen eddy. Beah ladled dandelion root tea into tin cups while Drew counted the buttons on Rhett's shirt under his breath, stopping at the 5th. "You fix fences tomorrow?" Beah asked once the children had curled up in their bunk. Rhett leaned back in his chair. "Was planning to. I could patch the canvas on the wagon cover while you're out there." He tilted his head. "You don't have to keep finding ways to earn your place here." She met his gaze. "I'm not earning. I'm building." Rhett said nothing to that, only reached over and pushed the last piece of fish toward her plate. She took it without a word. That night, when the fire had burned down to coals, they stood outside beneath a sky dusted with stars. The air was warmer than it had been in months, and the trees creaked softly in the thaw. Beah leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed to her chest. "Elias wanted to move west of Dillon," she said. "Talked about raising goats. Said the land out there was kinder." "What stopped him?" He coughed blood for a week and stopped talking about anything. Rhett shifted his weight. "You think about leaving again?" "No," she said. "But I think about what I'd have missed if I had." He stepped beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. "You're not the same woman who walked into that water." Beah turned her face to him. "No, I buried her." He reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Then I'm glad I met the one who came out." She looked down, then back up. "You think we're building something real, Rhett?" "I do," he said. "Every time I see you teaching Daisy to hold a knife right or hear Drew asking if it's time to milk the goat, yeah, I do." Beah's eyes searched his face. "If I fall for you, I'll fall all the way." Rhett didn't look away. "I'll be there to catch you." She stepped closer, her palms resting against his chest. "I don't have ribbon or lace or anything soft to offer you." "I don't want soft," he said. "I want honest." Beah rose onto her toes and he bent to meet her. Their lips met in quiet understanding, nothing rushed, nothing uncertain. Just warmth, steady and slow, like the thaw beneath their boots. When they pulled apart, she didn't step away. "I'm not afraid of the river anymore," she whispered. "You never have to face it alone again." Inside, the fire crackled low. Outside, the stars held steady. And between them, the space where grief had once lived now filled with something quieter, fiercer, something that would stay. The last frost came and went without ceremony. One morning, a thin crust of ice rimed the water bucket, and the next, it didn't. The soil softened underfoot, and the wind carried the scent of thawed roots and distant sage. Rhett ran a line of fence along the north boundary, hammering stakes while Drew trotted behind him, dragging the coil of wire and asking about everything from hawk feathers to why the sun seemed bigger now. Beah had traded with a passing trapper just after Dawn's spare blankets and a jar of dried apples for a pair of hens and a sack of barley. She stood by the coop Rhett had built, watching Daisy scatter feed with the careful precision of someone who'd been shown once and intended to get it right forever. "Daisy," Beah called. "What's the first thing we do when we gather eggs?" The little girl grinned, crouching low. "Check for snakes." "That's right." Inside the cabin, Rhett had cleared a corner near the hearth and begun laying stone for a chimney extension. He worked in silence, sleeves rolled to the elbow, hands steady as he mortared each piece. Beah watched him from the table, mending Drew's shirt while the children rested in the loft. "You ever think about building another room?" she asked. He looked up. For what? She threaded her needle again. For us. His brow furrowed, not in confusion, but thought. Then, slowly, he nodded. Could put it off the east wall, morning lights softer there. Bea smiled without lifting her eyes. I'd like that. That evening, rain rolled in from the mountain's slow, steady drops that tapped the roof like a lullaby. They ate early, then played dominoes by lamplight while the children dozed on a quilt near the fire. Bea leaned across the table, her voice low. Sometimes I wake up and don't know where I am. Not until I hear Drew breathing or feel your shoulder beside mine. You ever miss that old life? Rhett asked. She shook her head. I don't even carry it anymore. It's like a coat I outgrew. He reached across the table, lacing his fingers with hers. You fit here. I belong here, she said. With you. The rain deepened, soft against the windows. Rhett rose, moving to the hearth where the fire had burned low. He added a log, then turned to her, hand extended. She took it without hesitation and followed him to the bed. He pulled back the quilt, let her settle in before joining her. No words passed between them as he wrapped his arm around her waist. They didn't need them. In the morning, the world smelled clean. The dirt road to town was still too soft for the wagon, but it didn't matter. They had what they needed. Rhett rode out with Drew before noon, teaching him how to read tracks along the ridge. Bea stayed behind, showing Daisy how to stitch a hem. Afterward, she stood at the garden's edge, watching the first green shoots lift their heads through the soil. That evening, when Rhett returned, he carried a small paper parcel wrapped in twine. He handed it to Bea without a word. Inside was a ribbon not new but clean and a soft shade of fern green. For your hair, he said. Bea looked down at it, then up at him. Her throat tightened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she lifted her braid, tied the ribbon in place, and stood still while he looked at her. I've never been loved this way, she said. He stepped forward, resting his hand lightly on her cheek. Neither have I. They married in late summer. No preacher came. No paper was signed. But Bea stood barefoot in the garden, her children on either side, and said yes to a man who had given her not just shelter, but space to grow. Rhett answered with a simple vow. I will never let you carry anything alone. They sealed it with hands clasped, eyes open, and the quiet of the hills all around them. The seasons turned. Daisy learned to read before the first snow. Drew could gut a fish by the time the creek froze. Bea filled the root cellar with jars of beets and onions, her handwriting neat on every label. Rhett built the new room, just as they'd planned, with a window that caught the sunrise and a door that never locked. They danced once, just the two of them, on a night when the children slept and the fire burned low. No music but the rustle of cotton and the creak of old floorboards. Bea laughed when he stepped on her toe, and Rhett kissed her shoulder in apology. Years passed. The fence held. The chickens multiplied. The garden widened. And every evening, when the lights slanted gold through the trees, Rhett and Bea stood on the porch with fingers intertwined, watching their children chase the wind across the meadow. They had weathered sorrow. They had built something with their hands and their hearts, and what they made held. They were never alone again.